No airbrush, no problem, as I show you how to paint a Chaos Knight War Dog using only brushes with some help from our aerosol friends. I'm trying a new aerosol primer this week, Sunset Yellow by Colourforge, which is a direct match for Averland Sunset. First off, I primed all of the metallic parts using Leadbelcher spray, and then I used the Sunset Yellow for all of the armour panels. This is to match the knight I painted last week where I used my airbrush and pro acrylic paints. Once all that primer was nice and dry, I wanted to add some bronze areas to the metallics just to break up all of that silver. So the colour I used was Balthasar Gold, and I used this to pick out some of the knee joints, the gyro covers and the exhausts, and any other random parts. If you're not sure, check the box art, but it just breaks up that silver really nicely. Next up, it was time to paint all of the trim on the armour. Now I wanted this to be a darker silver than the silver exoskeleton, so the colour I used for this was Iron Warriors. Now take your time with this, just paint it over all of that trim. If you do make any mistakes, then you can use some Averland Sunset just to repair any errors that you might make. Now it's time to shade all of the metallics, and the colour we're going to use for this is Nuln Oil. So we're going to be doing all of the exoskeleton, we're going to do all of those bronze areas, as well as any exhausts and the chain on the top of the canopy. We're not going to do the trim at the moment. And what's really important here is that you make sure it doesn't pool too much. So use a decent sized brush, but just move that wash around, making sure you get into all the recesses, but that you don't get any big deep pools of it. When you're happy that that Nuln Oil is completely dry, and this is really important that it's completely dry, so you may need to have left it for a good half hour, an hour, maybe even used a bit of a hairdryer on it to speed it up. Take some Necron Compound and dry brush this over all of the skeleton of the knight. We're not doing the trim or parts on the canopy, it's just that skeleton, and just use it to get a nice sharp bright highlight on the edges. The next step is fairly quick, but we're going to do all of the tubing and pipes on the model, and the colour we're going to use for this is Black Templar. This is really simple, just pop it on there, and as it dries you'll start to pull away from those raised areas so you get a really nice dark black effect with a nice automatic highlight. Next up, I want to break up that yellow, and I'm going to paint half of the shoulder pads with Abaddon Black. Just make sure you paint the right part of it so that you've got the yellow half at the front and the black part at the back. You can also use this on some of the weapons if you want, such as some of the control boxes, gear boxes that are on all the weaponry as well. Take your time, you're going to need 2, maybe 3 really thin coats of Abaddon Black to get a nice bit of coverage there. Next up, we're going to shade all of that yellow armour as well as the trim, and we're going to do this a little bit differently to how we do it normally. And last time we used an oil wash, this time we're using an acrylic wash. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the area in water. This is just plain clean water, and I'm then going to take some Agrax Earthshade and paint that over the wet water. And what you'll see is because there's no surface tension, that Agrax Earthshade will then run into the recesses. If it does pool a little bit, then just dry your brush off and you can use this to clean the area. But it's a nice, quick, effective way of getting a really dirty yellow with some recess shading. The next thing I want to do is just give that black a little bit of a highlight, and the colour I'm going to use for this is Mechanicus Standard Grey. I'm just looking to catch all those raised areas as well as some of the areas by the trim where we'll just put a small line highlight, and of course I'm going to do this on any of the black areas that I've painted on the weapons as well. Next up, we want to start highlighting all of the yellow panels, and the colour I'm going to use for this is Yriel Yellow, and what I'm looking to do is stipple this over all of the yellow areas, which will give me a really nice transition between the darkest Agrax Earthshade, the Averland Sunset colour, and then the Yriel Yellow as we start to brighten and weather. Now is a good time to pop some decals down. So the first thing I'm going to do is prepare the area by using some Storm Shield, and I'm just going to pop this over all the areas where I'm going to apply those decals. I've cut out a selection of decals and I've put them on some paper towel. I've then wet them, and after a couple of seconds they'll slide off. I use a brush then to just pop them onto place on the model and just brush it over to pull out any air bubbles that might be underneath. Once those decals are completely dry, I put another coat of Storm Shield over them to protect them, and now I'm going to paint all of the skull elements. So the colour I'm going to base these with is Ushabti Bone. Once that Ushabti Bone's dry, I'm then going to take some Agrax Earthshade and use this to shade all of the skull areas. Then once that's completely dry, I'm going to go back to Ushabti Bone and just pick out those raised areas. I'm not going to worry about putting any more highlights on than this, because actually I think this is enough. These are fairly hidden anyway. I'm going to start the weathering next, and to make sure that it all looks uniform, I've actually assembled the armour plates on the model. So the first colour we're going to use is Dorn Yellow, and we're going to use this to start weathering all those yellow parts. I'm going to use this in a stippling motion around those raised edges in those areas which look like they're going to catch wear. And I'm just going to add little dots all around, and they'll start to join up, and you'll start to see they look like paint is curling and coming away. To simulate the bare undercoat of this model, I'm then going to take some Skavenblight Dinge and paint this inside all of that Dorn Yellow chipping that I've done. Now this will give you a nice effect. It's better to start off putting a little bit, because you can always go back and add more later, but this gives you a really nice weathered, destroyed paint look. I'm now going to paint all of the lenses. Now there's only one lens and then you've got the hatch on the carapace for this. So I'm going to use Corax White to base these. It'll take 2 coats to get a nice solid base in there. Once that Corax White is dry, I want to get a nice demonic green glow, and the colour I'm going to use to get that is Tesseract Glow, and all I'm doing is painting this over that eye lens and over the carapace hatch. We'll weather all of that metal trim and those exhausts on the top of the model next, and the colour I can use for this is Stormhost Silver. Now I'm using a really old synthetic brush for this. I'm getting the paint on there, wiping it off and just stippling it across, catching those raised edges in a little bit of a highlight style, but actually showing some scratch metal as well. As that metal is probably a little too bright, we're going to rust it down, and the colour we're going to use for this is Skrag Brown. Now I'm making sure this Skrag Brown is really thin, so I've probably got about 2 parts water to 1 part Skrag Brown. I'm going to put my brush in it and then wipe it off on a paper towel, and I'm going to then let that run into all the recesses around the metallics, and this gives you a really nice rust effect because it'll dry, and as it dries it'll blend in. If you want to add more rust you can do so afterwards, and if you want to add fresh rust you can perhaps use some Troll Slayer Orange, but I'm just going to settle with Skrag Brown here because it gives a really nice effect. The last thing I've got left to do on this model is all those wooden spikes poking out, and the colour I'm going to use for this is Wyldwood. So I'm just going to paint this directly over those areas, and I'm going to let it dry, and it should give me a nice wooden effect, and that yellow underneath will give a little bit of a highlight to it as well. And there we have it, this war dog is done, ready for the tabletop to accompany his master, the Knight Abominant. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, check out my other content, and I will see you next time.